Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People story. Ever opened a certified letter and felt your stomach drop? Mine said I owed $15,000 in HOA fines, $500 a day, for unauthorized landscaping. The crazy part? It wasn't landscaping. It was a safety requirement. I showed up with an attorney, they laughed us off. So we pulled one record that changed the entire game, and it made them call an emergency meeting. Why? I never thought I'd be the type to get into a legal battle with my homeowners association. I'm pretty much the opposite of a troublemaker. I follow rules, pay my taxes on time, and keep my property in good shape. But sometimes being the rule-following type is exactly what gets you into the biggest mess of your life. My property sits on about 15 acres at the very edge of what the marketing people call a luxury development. When I bought it 8 years ago, it was technically an out parcel, meaning it had been grandfathered into the HOA when the developer ran out of money and had to sell off pieces. The deed was older and had different restrictions than the newer homes. I liked it because it gave me space and privacy, plus the price was reasonable since most people didn't want to deal with the HOA drama. The main reason I picked this spot was for my gun range. I'm not some weekend warrior wannabe. I spent 12 years in the military and shooting has been part of my life since I was a kid. When I got out and settled into civilian life, having a place to practice safely was important to me. I wasn't going to half-ass it either. I hired a proper engineering firm to design the berms. These weren't just dirt piles like you might see at some backyard setup. We're talking about engineered earthworks with specific slopes, drainage systems, and sound baffling. The whole thing was built to state specifications for private ranges and then some. I even had the local sheriff's department inspect it before I ever fired a shot. Everything was documented, permitted where required, and completely legal. The berms themselves were about 8 feet high at the tallest point, covered with native grass that actually improved the erosion control on that part of my property. From the road, you could barely see them unless you knew what you were looking for. The sound suppression worked so well that most of my neighbors probably didn't even know I had a range back there. For the first few years, everything was fine. I kept to myself, maintained my property better than most, and never had any complaints. I checked the local ordinances every few months just to make sure nothing had changed. I even joined the county shooting sports club and helped teach safety courses for new gun owners. The problem started when the HOA board changed hands about 3 years ago. The old board was mostly made up of retirees who understood that different properties had different histories and needs. They focused on actual problems like broken streetlights and snow removal contracts. The new board was a completely different animal. The president was this woman who'd apparently been some kind of middle manager at a big corporation before she moved here. She had that particular energy of someone who'd spent years in meetings talking about synergy and leveraging core competencies. Now she was treating the HOA like her personal kingdom where she could finally be the one making the rules instead of following them. She started sending emails about elevating our community standards and protecting property values through proactive aesthetic management. Most people figured it was typical HOA nonsense that would blow over, but I had a bad feeling about it. Military training teaches you to pay attention when people start talking about changing rules and standards. Sure enough, the notices started coming. First, it was letters to people about lawn heights and mailbox colors. Then they started going after bigger things. One neighbor got cited for having a vegetable garden that was inconsistent with the residential character of the community. Another got a violation for parking their boat in their own driveway. I figured I'd be fine since my range was completely hidden from view and everything was legal, but I started documenting everything just in case. I took photos of my property from all angles, made copies of all my permits and engineering reports, and even had a surveyor come out to make sure I knew exactly where my property lines were. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday morning in early March. I was having coffee and checking email when I heard vehicles outside. Looking out the window, I saw 2 trucks from the HOA's landscaping company parked on the road near my property line. 3 guys were walking around with measuring tapes and clipboards pointing at my berms. I threw on a jacket and walked out to see what was going on. The crew leader was a guy in his 40s who looked uncomfortable when he saw me approaching. "Morning," I said. "Can I help you with something?" He glanced down at his clipboard. "We're just doing some measurements for the HOA board, nothing to worry about." "Measurements of what exactly?" "Just the dirt situation back there." He gestured vaguely toward my range. I kept my voice calm. "That's my private property you're measuring. Do you have permission to be here?" The guy looked even more uncomfortable. The board said we were supposed to document the violation for their records. What violation? I don't know the details, man. They just told us to measure the height and width of those dirt piles. I told them they needed to leave my property immediately and that any further surveys would require written permission. They packed up quickly and left, but I knew this was just the beginning. 2 days later, the certified letter arrived. The envelope was thick and official-looking, sent from some law office I'd never heard of. Inside was a notice of property lien and demand for payment that made my blood pressure spike. According to the letter, the HOA board had conducted an investigation and determined that my property was in violation of several community standards. They claimed the berms of my gun range constituted unauthorized industrial-grade landscaping and failure to maintain aesthetic standards consistent with the rolling hills character of the neighborhood. The financial part was what really got my attention. They were demanding $15,000 in accumulated fines, calculated at $500 per day for the past month, plus administrative fees. If I didn't pay within 30 days, they would begin foreclosure proceedings to recover the debt. I read the letter 3 times to make sure I understood it correctly. They were essentially claiming that my engineered safety berms were unsightly dirt piles and that I owed them $15,000 for the privilege of having them on my own property. The letter was signed by the HOA president and included a note that said, "Per the community bylaws, aesthetic violations may result in immediate liens regardless of prior approval or grandfathered status." I spent the rest of that day going through my property documents with a fine-tooth comb. My deed was definitely older than most of the neighborhood, dating back to before the current HOA covenants were written. The restrictions that applied to my property were much more basic. No commercial use, no structures over a certain height, that kind of thing. Nothing about aesthetic standards or rolling hills character. The next morning, I called the law office that had sent the letter. I wanted to understand exactly what they thought they were doing before I hired my own attorney. The receptionist transferred me to a lawyer who sounded like he was reading from a script. He explained that the HOA had the right to enforce community standards on all properties within their jurisdiction, regardless of when those properties were developed. When I pointed out that my range was completely legal and properly engineered, he said that legal and compliant with HOA standards were 2 different things. When I mentioned that my deed predated their current covenants, he said that HOA authority superseded individual deed restrictions. It was clear this guy either didn't understand property law or was deliberately giving me bad information. Either way, I knew I needed professional help. I spent the weekend researching attorneys and found one who specialized in HOA disputes. She had good reviews and seemed to understand that these cases were often more about power than actual violations. When I met with her the following Monday, she reviewed all my documents and had the same reaction I did. The lien was legally questionable at best, and the amount they were demanding was completely unreasonable for the alleged violation. She explained that HOAs do have broad authority, but they can't just ignore property rights and existing deed restrictions. The fact that my property was grandfathered in as an out parcel gave me additional protections that the HOA seemed to be ignoring. We decided the best approach was to attend their next board meeting and present our case calmly and professionally. If they were reasonable people, maybe we could resolve this without going to court. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, which was this big fancy building that had always been the pride of the development. It sat on beautifully landscaped grounds with a small park area behind it. The whole setup probably cost more than most people's houses. About 20 residents showed up, which was apparently a pretty good turnout for these things. Most people looked like they were there for entertainment rather than actual HOA business. The board sat at a long table at the front of the room. The president was exactly what I'd expected. Professionally dressed with that artificial smile that corporate people practice in management training. She had a stack of papers in front of her and a laptop that she kept checking throughout the meeting. When they got to my agenda item, she barely looked up from her notes. "We have a property violation issue to address with the resident at Lot 14. I stood up. "That would be me. I'm here with my attorney to discuss the lien you placed on my property." Her smile got a little tighter. "The board has determined that the unauthorized earthworks on your property are not consistent with our community standards. The fines and fees are clearly laid out in the notice you received." My attorney stood up next to me. "We'd like to present some information about the property's grandfathered status and the legal construction of the range facilities." The president held up her hand like she was stopping traffic. "Our standards apply to every square inch of this community. We own the rights to enforce the view and character of this neighborhood. The earthworks are an eyesore that affects property values for everyone else." I tried to explain that the berms were engineered safety features required by state law for private ranges, but she cut me off again. I don't care what the state allows, we have higher standards here. You can either pay the fines and remove the violation, or we'll proceed with foreclosure. It's that simple. The smugness in her voice was incredible. She was talking about taking someone's home like it was a routine business decision. My attorney tried to point out that the HOA's authority was limited by the existing deed restrictions, but the president wasn't interested in hearing it. Our legal counsel has assured us that HOA covenants supersede individual deed restrictions in matters of community standards. If you want to keep those dirt piles, you can find somewhere else to live. She said it like it was a done deal, like the HOA had absolute sovereignty over every property in the development regardless of individual rights or circumstances. The rest of the board members just sat there nodding along. It was clear they'd already made up their minds and this meeting was just for show. As we left the clubhouse that night, I was frustrated but not surprised. These people had convinced themselves they had unlimited authority and weren't interested in facts or legal arguments. My attorney said she'd seen this kind of overreach before. Some HOA boards get drunk on their own power and start making demands that go way beyond their actual legal authority. Usually it takes a lawsuit to bring them back to reality. Over the next few days, things escalated quickly. The HOA sent a landscaping crew to my property line again, this time to begin measuring for a fence they claimed they were going to build and bill me for. They also sent a notice of nuisance to the sheriff's department, claiming my range was... The next one is an entitled People story. Came out to investigate was actually someone I knew from the shooting club. He took one look at my setup and shook his head. "This is the cleanest, most professional private range I've seen," he said. "Whoever called this in was wasting everyone's time." He filed a report saying there was no safety violation and no grounds for any enforcement action. But the HOA's tactics were becoming clear. They were going to keep escalating until I either gave in or fought back hard enough to make them stop. That's when my attorney suggested we do some deeper research into the property records. If the HOA was claiming unlimited authority over the development, we needed to make sure they actually had clear title to everything they thought they owned. The title search took about a week, and what we found was absolutely incredible. Apparently, when the original developer ran into financial trouble and started selling off pieces of the development, there were some sloppy transfers that nobody had caught. The fancy clubhouse and the 5-acre common area park behind it had never been properly deeded to the HOA. According to the records, that land was still owned by something called residual development rights that had been held by the original developer. Here's where it got really interesting. When I bought my out-parcel property 8 years ago, the seller had thrown in those residual rights as part of the deal. My attorney said it was probably a tax write-off for them. They figured the rights were worthless since the development was mostly built out already. But those rights included ownership of any undeveloped parcels that hadn't been properly transferred, and according to the county records, the clubhouse property was still listed under those original development rights, which meant I owned the land that the HOA's clubhouse was sitting on. My attorney had to explain it to me twice before it really sank in. The HOA had been operating their clubhouse and treating the land as their common area for almost a decade, but they'd never actually owned it. They were essentially squatters on property that I'd unknowingly bought 8 years ago. The legal implications were staggering. If they wanted to push their lien against my gun range, I could respond by demanding they vacate my property immediately. Or I could file my own lien against their assets for unpaid land use fees going back to whenever they'd started using the clubhouse. My attorney was practically grinning when she laid out our options. This was the kind of legal ammunition that could end the whole dispute in our favor, but we had to play it smart. The first thing we did was have a proper survey done to confirm the boundaries. I hired the same surveying company that had done the original development work, and they confirmed what the title search had shown. The clubhouse, the parking lot, and about 3 acres of the park area were all on land that belonged to me. The surveyor mentioned that he'd actually flagged this issue years ago when the HOA had asked about expanding the parking lot, but nobody had followed up on it. He still had the old paperwork showing the discrepancy. Armed with this information, my attorney drafted what she called our opening move. Instead of fighting the lien directly, we were going to hit them where they didn't expect it. On a Friday morning, exactly 3 weeks after receiving their lien notice, I hand-delivered a certified letter to each member of the HOA board. The letter was titled Notice of Trespass and Demand for Payment. The letter politely informed them that they had been operating their clubhouse and related facilities on my private property without permission or compensation. It demanded immediate payment of 5 years of back rent at fair market value, plus administrative fees for the unauthorized use. I calculated the fair market value by looking at what similar event spaces charged for rentals in the area. For a facility that size, used almost daily for meetings, events, and activities, the numbers added up quickly. 5 years of back rent came to roughly $80,000. But here's the really beautiful part. The letter also informed them that since they were so concerned about aesthetic standards in the community, I would be conducting my own inspection of the clubhouse property to ensure it met my standards as the landowner. My attorney had found an obscure section in the county code about historical character preservation that gave property owners broad authority to regulate the appearance of structures on their land. It was probably meant for historic districts, but the language was general enough to apply anywhere. 3 days after sending the trespass notice, I showed up at the clubhouse with my own aesthetic inspection team, which was really just a contractor friend of mine with a clipboard and a camera. We documented everything that could possibly be considered an aesthetic violation. The clubhouse was painted in these bland beige and brown colors that were supposed to look timeless and sophisticated, but under my new standards they were offensive to the local historical character of the area. I sent the HOA board a formal violation notice demanding they repaint the entire clubhouse in historically appropriate colors within 30 days or face fines of $1,000 per day. For good measure, I specified that the historically appropriate color was bright orange, since that was apparently the color used on the original farm buildings that had existed on the site before the development. I also cited them for unauthorized signage because of all the HOA notices and rules posted around the building, improper landscaping because their decorative bushes weren't native species, and excessive lighting because they had floodlights that stayed on all night. The total fines I assessed came to about $3,000, with daily penalties that would add up fast if they didn't comply. The reaction was immediate and explosive. The HOA president called me within 2 hours of receiving the violation notice. She was absolutely furious, demanding to know what I thought I was doing and threatening to sue me for harassment. I kept my voice calm and professional. I explained that as the property owner, I had the same authority to enforce aesthetic standards that she claimed the HOA had over my property. If dirt berms were unsightly enough to justify a $15,000 lien, then surely a beige building was offensive enough to require immediate correction. She hung up on me, but I could tell the message had been received. The next few days were chaos. The HOA held an emergency board meeting which I attended as a concerned community member. The president tried to maintain control, but it was obvious that the other board members were starting to panic. When someone asked about the legal basis for my violation notices, she insisted that I was making frivolous claims and that their attorney would handle it. But when pressed for details about property ownership, she became evasive and kept saying the matter was under review. The coup de grace came when my attorney filed a formal quiet title action in county court. This was essentially a lawsuit asking the court to officially confirm that I owned the clubhouse property and that the HOA had no legal right to be there. The paperwork was airtight. We had the original development documents, the title search results, the survey confirming the boundaries, and documentation that the property had never been properly transferred to the HOA. 2 days after the quiet title action was filed, I got a call from the HOA's attorney, not the junior associate who'd been handling things before, but the senior partner who actually knew property law. His tone was completely different from our previous conversations. He was professional and respectful, and he asked if we could schedule a meeting to discuss potential resolutions to the current disputes. The meeting was held at his office the following week. My attorney and I sat on one side of a big conference table, while the HOA's lawyer sat across from us with copies of all our filings spread out in front of him. He got right to the point. My clients appear to have made some errors in their assessment of the property situation. We'd like to explore options for resolving this matter without further litigation. My attorney asked what specific errors he was referring to. Well, it appears that the HOA may not have clear title to the clubhouse property, and some of the violations they assessed against your client's property may have exceeded their authority under the existing deed restrictions. It was lawyer speak for, "We screwed up massively and need to find a way out of this mess." The negotiation took about 3 hours. The HOA's lawyer kept trying to find some middle ground where his clients could save face, but my attorney was firm. They had started this fight by placing an unjustified lien on my property and threatening foreclosure. Now they needed to deal with the consequences. The final settlement was more than I'd hoped for. The HOA agreed to immediately remove their lien against my property and pay all my legal fees. They also signed a permanent covenant waiver specifically exempting my property from any future aesthetic standards or landscaping requirements. But the best part was the lease agreement. I agreed to lease the clubhouse property back to the HOA for $1 per year, which would allow them to continue using their facility without having to find a new location. However, the lease included what my attorney called a behavioral clause. If the HOA ever harassed or filed frivolous violations against any out-parcel property owner in the development, the lease would be immediately terminated. They would have 30 days to remove their clubhouse and restore the property to its natural state. The day we signed the settlement, I walked into the final board meeting like I was arriving at my own victory party. The atmosphere was completely different from that first confrontational meeting. The board members who had been so arrogant before were quiet and subdued. The president tried to frame the settlement as a mutually beneficial agreement that allows everyone to move forward. But nobody was buying it. Everyone knew what had really happened. When they got to the part about reading the settlement terms aloud, you could have heard a pin drop. The permanent waiver of aesthetic standards for grandfathered properties was a complete reversal of everything the board had been claiming about their authority. But the behavioral clause was the real knockout punch. Several other residents had been dealing with their own HOA disputes, and now they had protection too. The board couldn't risk targeting anyone else without losing their precious clubhouse. After the meeting, a few neighbors came up to thank me for standing up to the board. One older gentleman said he'd been dealing with violations for parking his classic car in his own driveway, but those had mysteriously disappeared after news of the settlement got around. I drove home that night feeling better than I had in months. The range was safe, my property rights were protected, and the HOA had learned that they couldn't just steamroll people with threats and intimidation. The next morning, I spent some time at the range testing a new rifle I'd been working on. The sound of the shots echoing off the engineered berms was as satisfying as always, but now it had an extra meaning. Every shot was a reminder that sometimes standing up for yourself pays off in ways you never expected. The final irony came about a month later. The HOA actually did repaint the clubhouse, though not in the bright orange I'd demanded. They went with a historically appropriate green that actually looked much better than the original beige. Several residents commented that it was an improvement. I kept the $1 lease payments in a special envelope in my desk. Every year when the payment came due, I'd deposit the dollar and file the receipt. It wasn't about the money, it was about the principle. They had learned that property rights matter and that threatening someone's home has consequences. The gun range is still there, exactly as it was before this whole mess started. The berms are still perfectly maintained, the safety protocols are still followed religiously, and everything remains completely legal and properly documented. But now I have something extra, a permanent guarantee that no HOA board, no matter how power-hungry, can ever threaten my property again. And if they try to bully any other grandfathered property owners, they'll lose the clubhouse they're so proud of. Sometimes the best defense really is a good offense, especially when you have the law on your side and the patience to let your opponents dig their own graves. The HOA learned that the hard way, and I doubt they'll forget the lesson anytime soon. Every time I drive past the clubhouse now, I can't help but smile a little. It's a nice building, and I'm glad the community gets to keep using it. But it's also a daily reminder that even the most arrogant people can be brought down to earth when they mess with someone who knows their rights and isn't afraid to fight back. The range is still perfect for its intended purpose. A safe, legal place to practice shooting and maintain skills that might be important someday. But it's also become something more than that. It's a symbol of the principle that your home is your castle, and that even homeowners associations have limits to their power. And that's a principle worth fighting for. The next one is a malicious compliance story. I was working remotely for a European-based manufacturer of, at least my division, high-end broadcast processing equipment. They also made other pro equipment, but this area was the highest end and by far the most technically demanding. Very niche-y, very configuration dependent, etc. Great technical staff and developers in Europe. We had great relationship being a bunch of tech nerds who could talk about IP ranges and capacitor values for hours. The US office just took orders from HQ over there. Had some good basic techs, but not set up to do any high-end troubleshooting, which is exactly why I existed. There was an acquisition coming up and auditors started to be involved. We had to send in inventory of all of our computers and test gear, etc. Fine, whatever. Well, remember that setup-dependent part? I was right in the middle of a huge project with one of the largest US broadcasters, which had already resulted in one of the largest upgrade sales this division had ever made, and was testing some fresh-from-the-sandbox SNMP features. This is pretty old tech that is still being used, so I enlisted an older Supermicro server I had been barely using for remotely accessing some kit in my workshop, to do some basic SNMP functions to make sure these new features didn't bung anything up before I literally put them in air on 50+ stations. Things were working fine with tests. I'd get a new revision first thing in the morning, bang on it a bit, send it off to my tech contact by my EOD at the network, which was his morning. Not terribly difficult, but pretty nichey, and also one reason I worked for this company. No one knew at all what any of this was in North America. So, auditors are involved, and the North American office that just takes orders sees this Supermicro server on the inventory list. And it's just the end of the world. Why is there a server out in the field? Why do you need so much test equipment? Who approved this? Etc. My first couple replies were just disregarded because no one knew what I was talking about. A decision was made that this server had to go back. A third insistence from me that this was actively used and who else would take this over fell on deaf ears. It was the most important thing in the entire world that they get this server back. It's a junky old Supermicro 1RU utility beast that costs maybe $1,000 at most. For whatever reason, I was feeling extra snarky the day I should have boxed the server up, so I wrote an extra friendly note to all the techs, the decision makers at the US office, and to my tech contact and his boss at the network, introducing everyone, thanking them for taking over this critical project, and thanking HQ for helping take on this time-sensitive test phase that would really help me get to other critical projects. About 25 minutes later, I sent tracking information for all the kit. Still didn't box up the server. I was supposed to send back. About an hour later, I get a really odd email from the decision makers in the US office. He doesn't want to admit that no one at HQ doesn't know what the hell I was talking about technically, and simultaneously realize this is a huge account that would totally affect their bonuses if another nice sale came through. They were trying to save face and cover for their techs by suggesting maybe I get them up to speed on the project before we do anything drastic. I just replied to his email with the tracking information again and mentioned I had suggested this 3 times now. 25 minutes later, I get a freaked out phone call from the head tech at the US HQ. Him and his superior, the decision maker, have just got a very nice call from my contact's boss at the network. They were so happy with the service so far, I had a great relationship at this point, and excited that having someone else checking these updates would allow me to be on site more, big future plans, etc. He is wondering who is going to do this work now. Now this comes up, I just repeated that 3 times this was brought up now so clearly this decision was educated, they know best. So now there's full-blown panic at US HQ. Knowing this, I send a note to the developers in Europe to make sure the new updated code goes to the catch-all address for the US HQ tech team, and not me because they will be doing the testing going forward. This has the desired effect because now the head of development in Europe is on the horn with the decision maker in US, wondering about who they recently hired, without approval, to be able to have these in-house resources now. By the time that UPS pickup was supposed to have happened, somehow having this old server back was no longer the highest priority. In fact, I never heard about the server again. The next one is an entitled people story. As I'm sure all of you in the USA know, we had a major snowstorm recently. Our area is still pretty much limping along as we dig ourselves out from nearly 2 feet of snow. Because of this, the local train system people use in our area was extremely packed last night. I don't normally like getting on trains this full, but had little choice. I get on the train to head home after work and spot a couple of women both covering a seat with their bags. I politely ask them if they could please move their bags so I can sit down. The older woman on my left does, but the much younger one on my right give me attitude. She's already sitting down but doesn't want others to sit too, apparently. I noticed that she's a larger person, so I tried to discreetly notice if maybe she was trying to cover up the fact that perhaps she was occupying more than one seat. I didn't want to embarrass her if she was. I would have just politely stepped back and acted like I'd changed my mind and thanked her. She wasn't filling the seat, so I took it. That's when she decided to get difficult. Girlie decided she needed to lean hard against me for some weird reason because she thought she should have 2 seats on a crowded train. I ignored her despite this and pulled out my tablet to play a game until my stop. After a couple of minutes, when this didn't have the effect she wanted, the woman decided to up her game. She tells me that I need to move because I'm making her feel uncomfortable. I'm a woman half her size wearing a parka with the hood covering my head. I'm staring down at my screen, not at her or anywhere else. What am I doing exactly that would make her or anyone else feel uncomfortable? I looked up at her and she tells me that she can't breathe and she's pregnant. I don't know if this make me the entitled one or not, but I told her that this did not entitle her to 2 seats, that I paid to get on this train just like her and I was allowed a seat if I wanted one. I also told her that she seemed to be breathing just fine and she wasn't entitled to special treatment just because she's pregnant. I'd given birth myself and wasn't impressed. Basically, I made it clear to her that regardless of how much she bitched and moaned, I was not going to give her what she wanted just because she thought she should have it. This went on for probably 5 minutes before I decided I didn't want to engage anymore and just went back to playing my game. A few minutes later, she stood up to get off, but just as she passed me, this little witch decided it would be okay to pour water on my tablet, all because she wasn't allowed to have 2 seats on a crowded train. I stood up to shove the still dribbling water bottle out of my direction because she was actually pouring it out on not just me but everyone that was sitting in that row of seats, and she was yelling something about maybe next time, about giving her a seat or something. I honestly didn't care. I was sorely tempted to slap the girl across the face, but that would have made me just as immature at her. She's assaulted me and tried to destroy my property, all because she couldn't have what she wanted. If she was feeling that claustrophobic, why didn't she get off the train then? Why did her issue become my problem? As I said before, I might have been the entitled one in this situation, but I don't regret what I did, and no, my tablet was not damaged. You can come at me if you want, but I honestly don't care. I don't think I did anything wrong. The next one is an entitled people story.
So I bought the worst tasting beer I could find and left it out for him to take. Not long ago, I posted about how my brother went out of his way to follow me when I tried to go camping alone. Him and that crazy vehicle he calls the mini ram that he made by cutting up a minivan and adding all sorts of other mods. My brother has stolen beer from me before on previous camping trips because he and his friends always drink too much and never buy enough. And when he followed me to my camping spot with his own camper a couple weeks prior, he tried to steal a 6-pack from my fridge and acted like a big baby when I made him give it back. So I thought up this little gem of an idea, but it was no easy feat as my brother will drink just about any beer so long as it gets him drunk. To try and find a beer that was truly nasty, I started asking around and buying different brands. After a couple weeks, I hit Pay Dirt. I won't say the brand name of the beer, but it was bad. There was so much hop to the flavor that it made me shudder every time I took a swig. I could barely finish one bottle without puking because it made me gag so much. So, this stuff was perfect. Also, I know some people really like that kind of overly hoppy beer. I'm not trying to offend, but to me, it was just horrid. I started openly talking about going camping again in my favorite area, and getting my friends to join in. My brother easily got wind of this, and decided he wanted to go camping too. He showed up with his mini ram and camper about 2 hours after I'd gotten to the campsite. Only this time, he didn't try to park next to me, and instead went to the next spot about 100 yards further down the road. My friends and I partied it up in our own way. Played music, danced like idiots around a fire, played stupid games, all the usual. And knowing my brother, he and his friends would run out of beer at some point and try to mooch off us because they have no concept of drinking in moderation. They didn't bother us on the Friday night. But on Saturday night, around 1 or 2 a.m., my brother hobbled over asking for beer. We all just ignored him like he wasn't there, which made him get an attitude. One of my friends brought his big cooler and was keeping all our good beer and food in it, and we kept the cooler near us or locked in my truck at all times. Inside my camper, I left 2 full 6-packs of that horrid beer in the mini fridge. My brother just grabbed them and walked away. He acted like he was being sneaky, but seeing a drunk man act like he was invisible was just hilarious. About a half hour later, my brother came hobbling back and looking sick. He started demanding to know what was in the beer I bought. I started asking him what he meant because I didn't give him any beer. He looked flustered for a moment and then finally just said he took some beer from my camper. I asked if it was the blank brew and he said yes. I laughed and said that stuff was crap and he could have it. I even pulled out another 6-pack that was minus the one I drank when I tested the beer and tried to hand it to him. He looked like he wanted to throw up at the sight of it and left. Then, just to be extra petty, my friend and I snuck over to his campsite after a little while and left the remaining 6-pack on top of his cooler. He and his friends were all wasted and actually still drinking the nasty beers I tricked them into stealing. And their faces all showed how bad it was. Every time one of them took a swig, it was followed by RBF. But they were so drunk that they probably wouldn't even notice there was more of that same beer. My friends and I watched from nearby as they kept drinking and making sour faces. My brother eventually puked on himself and then ran into the river to get the vomit off himself. He threw up some more in the water. It wasn't a pretty sight, even though we could barely see him in the dark. We could still hear him. He repeatedly threw up with his face in the water and made loud gurgle noises, then cursed my name over and over again. That's when we finally had enough of watching them. I didn't see my brother or his 2 friends again until well into the afternoon. They were all badly hungover. And despite how much they drank, they couldn't forget that nasty beer they had the night before, especially since the bottles were littered all over the ground. My brother actually demanded I apologize, and I just laughed and said, "You actually want me to apologize to you for stealing beer from me?" And then we all started laughing at him. He left humiliated, and we didn't interact again. I drove home before he did this time, and he's not spoken about what happened to our parents, and I've heard nothing from mutual friends. I guess this time he wants to keep his humiliation a secret. I think next time I'll get some beer spiked with laxative to leave for him. That might be funny. The next story is titled, Karen, my neighbor, poisons and attempts to kill my guard dog to gain unauthorized access to my pool safely. Growing up, I always had a love for animals. I grew up in a home filled with pets, dogs, cats, birds, and even a hamster. As I grew older and moved into my own house, I knew that I wanted a pet that could not only keep me company, but also help keep me safe. That's when I decided to adopt a German Shepherd mix named Max. From the moment I brought Max home, he quickly became my closest companion. He was always by my side, and I felt safer knowing that he was always on the lookout. Max was the perfect watchdog, always barking when someone approached the fence, but he never harmed anyone. However, my neighbor Karen had different ideas. Karen believed that just because she had children, she could come onto my property and use my pool without asking. When I told her that she couldn't trespass, she screamed at me and called Max a monster. It wasn't long before Karen started taking matters into her own hands. Max became very sick out of nowhere and I rushed him to the vet. After some tests, the vet found traces of poison in his system. I was devastated, but relieved to hear he would recover. When I checked my security cameras, I was shocked to see Karen feeding Max something from a bag. I knew I had to take action. I hired a lawyer and we filed a lawsuit against Karen for trespassing, making false claims to animal control and animal abuse. I wasn't sure what to expect when we got to court, but Karen admitted to everything. The judge was outraged and ordered her to pay my entire vet bill and complete community service at an animal shelter. The news of Karen's actions quickly spread throughout the neighborhood and she became an outcast. Although justice was served, it was hard not to feel uneasy knowing what Karen had done. I made sure to always keep an eye on Max and installed more security cameras around my property. A few months had passed and I was beginning to feel like things were finally settling down. I was sitting in my living room reading a book when I heard a loud crash. I ran outside and saw that Karen had crashed her car into my fence, attempting to break in once again. This time, she was carrying a bat and a knife. I immediately called the police, but I knew I had to act fast to protect Max. I grabbed my phone and my pepper spray and ran to the backyard. When I got there, I saw Karen attempting to climb over the fence. Max was barking louder than ever before, trying to protect our home. Karen saw me and charged at me with the bat. I sprayed her with the pepper spray, but it didn't seem to faze her. She swung the bat at me, but I was able to dodge it. In the commotion, Max managed to get loose from his leash and jumped on Karen, biting her arm. The police arrived just as Karen was trying to free herself from Max's grip. They arrested her and charged her with attempted assault, breaking and entering, and possession of a weapon. I was shaken, but I knew that Max had saved my life. In the end, Karen was sentenced to 10 years in prison for her crimes. Max was hailed a hero and even got his own segment on the local news. I was grateful for his protection, and I knew that I would always be safe with him by my side. The next story is titled, Neighbor Moves After I Install a Camera. I live in a semi-detached house and share a driveway. When I first moved in, an older British couple lived next door. I got along with them great, then the wife passed and the husband moved to an apartment and sold the house to someone I will call Cece. Initially, there were no issues with Cece, but sometimes she did things that annoyed me. However, for the most part, I was able to ignore her and her extended family. On one occasion, I found the roof of my spouse's car dented after it was left on the street. On another occasion, I found damage to my spouse's car, and the easiest explanation was if someone backed out of Cece's driveway without looking. I didn't have any firm evidence, just circumstantial evidence. So, I installed a camera, no audio, just video, on my garage that looked out over the shared driveway and the street. I then went and told all my neighbors about the damage to the car and the new camera. Nobody verbalized any concerns, and nobody admitted to the damage. By the end of the next week, Cece listed her house for sale and it closed quite quickly, and I had a new neighbor. Now, Cece was a realtor and should have known the law about vacating her old house, but she was still making trips with her stuff long after the new owner showed up. Cece ended up suing the new owner because she had left stuff behind that she was trying to recover. On one morning, as I was leaving for work, I saw the legal papers on the windshield of the new owner's car, so I made a point of asking about them. This is when I learned about all of the drama and the ongoing issues. The new owner indicated that they were going to have to document everything to defend themselves in court. This is where the petty revenge came in. I asked if the new neighbor wanted video footage. I provided footage of multiple loads of furniture being moved past the deadline. I provided footage of Cece's sister sneaking across my property to try and serve the new neighbor, and then illegally leaving the paperwork on the car. I also provided footage of Cece driving by at random times. With the footage that I provided, the case was awarded to my new neighbor that had to countersue Cece. The next story is titled, Hold Up the Elevator on Each Floor. Enjoy stopping unnecessarily on a bunch of floors on your way down. So yesterday I was returning home with a heavy bag of groceries. As I approached my apartment building, I saw a delivery man with parcel trolley waiting at the door. I decided to open it for him so he could get in while I checked my mailbox. As I entered the building, I heard him get on the elevator. He must have heard me enter the building as well, but he didn't bother to hold the lift for me. No big deal, I'll just wait for it to come back down. The elevator stopped on the 4th floor, and I noticed it stayed at the 4th floor for a lot longer than it normally should, almost like it was stuck. After a moment, it started moving, except instead of going down to me, it was going up, and stopped at the 5th floor. Again, it was stopping for an unusually long time. It was at this point I realized the courier must have been holding up the elevator doors with his trolley, so they couldn't close, meaning the elevator won't move on. Annoyed, because I have a heavy bag of shopping, I live on the 7th floor, and we only have one elevator, I was even more incensed when I saw the elevator carry on going further up and holding at other floors. At this point, I'd been waiting a good couple of minutes. So, I decided to take the stairs to the 7th floor. However, I ran as fast as I could. Why? Because the elevator was coming down from the 16th floor, and on my way to the 7th floor, I pressed for the elevator on each floor I passed. If he enjoyed holding up the lift, he could spend extra time in them on the way down. I waited in the stairwell and listened to the elevator stop on my floor, doors open, doors close, stop on the 6th, and so on. When it hit the 5th, I could just about hear the courier say, "For duck's sake," as he realized no one is getting on the elevator. I was out of breath and had a good sweat going on, but it was worth it in the name of pettiness. The next story is titled, Karen Wants to Buy My Nintendo Switch with My PayPal Included. A little bit of background to the context, I was selling my Nintendo Switch and I made it very clear I was not sending it through the mail. It breaks a lot here. It was listed for around 300 USD with games, a bag, and an SD card, around 50 USD. It's also translated from another language, so spelling might not be the world's best. Karen. Hi, Mr. 16. I see your Nintendo is for sale. Me. Yes, it's still for sale. Karen. Great, I'd like to buy it for $150 US with shipping and all accessories. Mr. 16. First of all, I'm not sending it. Second, $150 US is way too low. $300 US is the lowest I can go. Karen. But I need it. Yes, she wrote that. Mr. 16. Not really my problem. I'm not in a rush to sell it. Karen. Fine, I'll do $300 US with your account password linked. Mr. 16. That's not gonna happen. First of all, I'm not shipping. Karen. But if I need to come pick it up, I want your account as well. And it better be linked to PayPal. Mr. 16. So, let me get this straight. You want, for $300 US, to come here, get the Switch, and my account together, with my PayPal, Karen. That's right, since I have to drive an hour, it's the least you can do. Mr. 16. Haha, nope, never going to happen. You know what? I'll give it for free to my brother, or see if another person will come buy it. Karen. But I need it. Mr. 16. Bye. Blocked. The last story is titled, Guy Potentially Ruined His Life for Telling Me to Kill Myself. I'm not entirely sure how correct this story is for this subreddit, but it might fit. I work for an IT company that does tech support. We receive calls for help. We try to help. This guy called up asking for help to remove a piece of software that required administrator rights. Pretty standard, nothing special. However, the computer he was requesting help with was his own personal computer. Obviously, we don't have any access or control over random people's computers. I have zero way I can help him without the admin account, and he said he doesn't know the account. The software was some kind of parental management software that restricts him from doing things. This guy is in his early 20s. I know this because we can see the details of the people that call us on our system. So, kind of hilarious he has this software installed. Anyway, after I tell him that I cannot help him, he ends up telling me that I work for a trash company and that I should kill myself. I don't even respond, and he hangs up the phone. Now, obviously the calls are recorded, and I'm not going to just ignore what just happened. I tell my manager the story, he listens to the phone call. My manager then calls the liaison for the company he called from. They find out that this guy is an intern at that company. He now no longer works for the company. During the call, they decide to get the CEO on the phone and tell him what happened. Shortly after that call, the CEO lets us know that he called the university that the guy is currently going to. The university has now dropped him from all his classes. This guy has now lost his intern job and lost his placement in university, all because he told me to kill myself on the phone.
The next one is an entitled people story.
My 31 female younger cousin, 28 female, recently found out she's pregnant. She's really excited, but she found out she's having triplets. The dad, 45 male, is a real piece of work and won't be in the picture, and can't offer financial support. She doesn't make very much money, and she has no savings. I myself have 2 kids, and even with the financial and emotional support of my partner, it can be very stressful. Over the past few weeks, I've gently tried to tell her that it may not be green pastures ahead. She doesn't even have a functional car right now. It's like her head is stuck in the sand and she's only talking about how amazing it will be, how blessed she is, how it's a miracle, how she'll just figure it out. On Christmas Eve, she surprised the rest of the family with the news after doing a big surprise scavenger hunt that led to 3 onesies. Her mom already knew, but told grandparents, cousins, aunts, uncles, etc. She didn't get the reaction she was hoping for. Some people told her she should consider her options like adoption or abortion, even though some are very conservative and pro-life. Some talked to her about how hard this will be, asked about how she will afford this, wanted to know what support the dad would be giving, etc. It was not very celebratory. I could tell she was upset and she left early. I went to talk to her this morning in her studio apartment. I told her I was sorry for everyone's reaction, but that I could see where the family was coming from and that they just wanted the best for her and were concerned. I asked her what she expected the reaction to be, and she told me she thought everyone would rally together to help her now and to offer a bunch of help once the babies arrived. She expected financial support too. I told her that she can't rely on others like that, and she'll likely have to figure a lot of this out on her own if she goes through with it. She told me that I'm horrible, that our family is terrible, and that we all deserve each other, and that unless she gets our support, she'll cut us all out. Then she told me to leave. In some ways, I think it is a reality check, but the more I think about it, I also know how overwhelming it is to be pregnant, and I'm sorry that she didn't get any happy reactions or offers of support. Especially because in the past, other family members have gotten very happy family reactions when sharing their pregnancies. Am I the a-hole for agreeing with the rest of our family? Comment said, not the a-hole. She says she will go to NC, but I promise you she will remember everyone's phone number when she needs financial assistance. You did the right thing by talking to her privately and gently about the realities. If she keeps the babies, then she'll find that out quickly enough. Another comment said, not the a-hole. But your cousin is going to get a hell of a reality check. Since she's having triplets, she's basically guaranteed to have her children in the NICU due to prematurity. She'd be incredibly lucky if this didn't happen. Caring for 3 newborns is going to take more than one person, and it doesn't sound like she understands this. She can't just assume family is going to financially support her and be her full-time nannies. That isn't realistic. Her life is about to get really hard. The next story is titled, Am I the A-hole for refusing to drop charges against a 16-year-old? My brother, 17 male, lives with me, 25 female, and my husband, 26 male, full since both our parents passed away in an accident last February. He's a great kid, but losing our parents made him a quiet, sad young boy. I've tried to encourage him to attend therapy so he can work on his grief, but he has refused every single time, telling me that he's not ready yet. I get it. Everyone works at their own pace, and as long as he's not deliberately hurting himself, I won't pressure him. I try to be as involved in his life as I can without it being overwhelming. We both enjoy movie nights or binge-watch shows on the weekends, and he also helps my husband with his old car. Before our parents' passing, my brother had a GF, 16. She seemed like a good kid too, but after the funeral, my brother decided that being in a relationship wasn't what he needed at the time and broke up with her. Totally valid. But she didn't take it good and was sure that my brother only needed some love to heal. Last month, she began to drop letters and gifts to our door, and my brother refused to open them every single time. She used to message and call him too, and I could see the distress on my brother's face. The worst thing happened last Friday. It was my brother's birthday, and my husband and I decided to take him out. When we got back, he went to his room, and as soon as he did it, he came down running. Now, his ex found her own way into my house, arranged his room with photos of him with her, their friends, and our family, put some balloons, and was waiting for him with a cake. Mind you, this is creepy as duck, so while my husband entertained her, I called the police, and they took her for trespassing private property. My brother is thankful, but my husband and the kids' parents are sure I'm overreacting and that I should drop the charges because she's trying to do something nice. Little update, I just talked to my brother and we agreed on getting a restraining order no matter what. He'll be switching rooms since he told me that he can't sleep there anymore. Our guest room is a bit smaller, but he says that he doesn't care. That's it for now. He hasn't said anything about therapy or dropping the charges. Comment said, not the a-hole. Let's do the gender reverse test. A 16-year-old boy is broken up with by his girlfriend and sends her a bunch of letters, gifts, and eventually breaks into her house and bedroom. She's turned into a stalker, OP, and you need to protect your brother from her. Another comment said, not the a-hole. That's stalking. It doesn't matter how sweet her intentions are, that's what she's doing. Her youth and femininity do not give her a pass. She was told to stop. She did not. Instead, she displayed a clear pattern of escalating behavior. There's no reason to believe she won't decide to take it further if she gets away with this. This is a life lesson she needs to learn. It doesn't matter how harsh anyone else thinks it is. You don't break into someone's house and play victim when there are consequences. The next story is titled, Am I the a-hole for refusing to change how my family does inheritance? My family has a tradition involving inheritance. Children receive sentimental items and a token cash amount, and grandchildren get a trust set up for their future. It works for our family and has for a few generations now. My brother blew his trust during the dot-com bubble, but his kids still have money for university and to get a start on life. It's a way to keep one generation from messing everything up. I'm doing my will, and my daughter has approached me about her inheritance. She informed me that she was going to be child-free. I respect her decision. I told her that her inheritance from myself would be some souvenirs from her childhood trips and about $5,000. She said that she knew that each of her brother's children was receiving substantially more than that in their trust. I said that she had received her trust from her grandmother and that was how it worked. She thinks it's unfair that her decision will lead to her getting less money. She refuses to understand that even if she had 10 children, she would not be getting any more than what she's already getting. She called the family tradition ridiculous and patriarchal, which is odd because, as stated, her trust came from her grandmother. She thinks I'm an a-hole for not changing how things are done. I told her that our family has been doing this for a long time and it works. Am I the a-hole? Comments said not the a-hole, but I think the fundamental issue is that you both view an inheritance from you differently. I think she's seeing this as how much is she getting and how much are her brothers getting. But the point of the inheritance from you is not to make things equal between your sons and your daughter. The point of this inheritance is to help future generations. There are no future generations coming from her, so she doesn't get extra money. If I were you discussing this with her, I would avoid getting sidetracked into discussions about how her brothers are getting more, how unfair it is, etc. Every time she tries, bring it back to the core point of the inheritance, which is concerned with supporting future generations. Turn the tables on her. Ask her, was it unfair for her grandparents to give her money? Should you ask her and her brother to give that inheritance back to you? Does it not make sense to ensure that future children are cared for? Etc. Another comment said, not the a-hole. She has zero power over how you split your inheritance. Seems like you're trying to split it equally based on how your parents have done, which makes you kind of a nice person not making your decision based on how much you like a certain child. It's her decision not to have children, she's already been granted a privileged start of life, and she needs the money less than your grandchildren. She's the a-hole for trying to take what you want to give to someone else. The next story is titled, Am I the a-hole for causing a family rift because I don't want to sleep outside in my mom's yard on Christmas? I, 18F, am the youngest out of 4 kids. My siblings are 31M, 28F, and 25M. We were raised by our dad and stepmom, and our bio mom lives in another country with her husband. She wants me and my siblings to spend Christmas with her this year and has offered to pay for our transport and visas. My siblings are all married and have kids and are going to bring their spouses and kids with them. Our mom's house is quite big, and she said that she'll spread out air mattresses in the living room and there's a guest room. She didn't say anything specifically to me about where I'd be sleeping, so I assumed I'd be sleeping on one of the air mattresses. Well, one of my brothers told me that my mom expects me to sleep in a tent outside. I honestly thought he was messing with me, but when I asked my mom about it, turns out she did. The conversation wasn't in English, but it basically went like this. Me. Brother's name said that you expect me to sleep outside in a tent? Is this true? Mom. Yeah, I thought you'd be fine with having your own tent. Me. Why didn't you talk to me about it? Mom. I didn't think it'd be a problem. Is it a problem? Me. It is. I don't want to sleep outside. Mom. I don't know what you want me to do. There's too many of you. Me. Can I sleep on the couch? Mom. No. Husband's name likes to watch TV late. You'll be a nuisance. Me. I don't know then, but I'm not sleeping outside. I'd rather not go. My mom told all my siblings about the conversation, and now they're all mad at me and told me to suck it up and go. They said I'm being selfish and making a fuss about nothing, and that I can't expect any of them to sleep outside with their spouses or kids. I told my dad about it, and he's now royally pissed off with my mom and said that she's being a mega idiot and alienating me on purpose, and they had a huge argument on the phone. My siblings are all mad at me for causing this. Comment said, not the a-hole. The fact that your stepdad wanting to watch TV at night is more important than you being able to sleep inside tells you exactly where you stand in your mother's priority list. If your a-hole siblings continue to pretend that sleeping outside in a tent during winter isn't a big deal, tell them that you accept their offer to switch beds with them. Another comment said, not the a-hole. Your mother and her husband are putting you below his desire to watch TV at night. He can suck it up and skip TV for a few days, or he can move the TV to the bedroom for the duration of the visit and watch TV in the comfort of his own bedroom. Or he can move the TV to a tent in the yard and watch it out there. The last story is titled, Am I the a-hole for leaving my home and telling my husband I won't return unless his family leaves? So, for context, my 26F husband's 33M grandmother, 78F, had a cancer removal procedure on her face, and it left half her face with no skin. She needs wound care, home health once a week. Bandage needs changed every other day, though. I told him she could stay temporarily, but not long term. We live in a 1-bedroom house with our 2 kids, almost 2M and 1F, as well as our 3 German Shepherds. She initially stayed 3 weeks. His cousin, 20F, and I would help with wound care when home health wasn't here. His grandmother expects me to make her 3 meals a day, whenever she wants. I work nights and nap when the littles nap during the day. She will often wake me up because she wants her bandage changed or food during these times. Last week, she started yelling at my son while he was playing. She also told me that my dogs are poor dogs because I had them crated. It was for 15 minutes while I cleaned the floor in their paws since it was muddy outside. A week ago, she decided to go home. I told my husband I did not want her coming back. I feel it's important I mention there are 4 capable adults living with her that can take care of her. Went out 2 days later and changed her bandage. I spoke with my sister-in-law, 33F, about her coming to get the wound care supplies, even offered to meet her somewhere. Well, she never got them. So fast forward to today, the bandage has not been changed in 5 days. His grandmother and niece, 10F, showed up to our house unannounced at 6:30 a.m., waking all of us, including the babies, up. I was livid. Not only did my husband not talk to her about staying home, but they just showed up early morning without asking. She lacks boundaries, and that's a problem for me. I told my husband I do not want her here as I have too much on my plate. He works 12s, 8 to 8, M to F, so childcare is solely on me during that time due to the baby's schedules. I also work, cook, clean, train, groom, and take care of 3 dogs. We got in a huge argument, and he thinks I'm unreasonable and that his Nana is just a poor old woman who needs help. I left the house with the kids, and he says I'm being a jerk. So, am I the a-hole here? Comment said, not the a-hole, but your husband sure is. I will never understand for the life of me why these am I the a-hole husbands think helping an extended family member at the expense of his family is okay. It's a 1-bedroom apartment for F's sake. He doesn't see the issue because he's not home for the majority of the week. That's effing BS. He's not your employer, he does not get to order you into jobs you don't want. Being a full-time caretaker is a lot already, let alone all the other factors. He should want you to be able to give your children your full attention. She has 4 other adults that can help her. Tell your husband it's buy Nana or buy wife. His choice. Another comment said, not the a-hole. And Nana can't make her own meals, but she can drive to your home? Something's wrong with that scenario. You have enough responsibility with 2 toddlers and 3 dogs. I can imagine that taking care of your household takes an immense amount of time and energy. Give someone else a turn taking care of inconsiderate Nana.
The next one is an entitled people story.
7 years ago, I was married and expecting a baby when things went horribly wrong. About 10 weeks into my pregnancy, I suffered a miscarriage, and then I returned home to find my husband in bed with my sister. The 2 of them tried to apologize and convince me that we could all get over it, but I wanted nothing to do with either of them, or even less so when I found out she had gotten pregnant. My divorce was finalized quickly because I wanted nothing from him other than the divorce, and was willing to leave the marriage with nothing but the clothes on my back. Pretty early, I realized my parents were hoping I would want to still be part of the baby's life, but I wanted nothing to do with the baby my sister conceived while sleeping with my husband, now ex, as I lay in hospital losing my own pregnancy. I refused any and all contact with my sister and ex. They married and had 2 more children after the one she conceived during my marriage to him. I met my current husband when I was distancing myself from my whole family, and he was amazing, and his family were great. We got married 2 years ago, and his family are nothing short of the best. I adore the nieces and nephews I've gained through my marriage to him, and we spend a lot of time together. Around 3 months ago, my sister called me at work using my work phone, and told me she needed me and could I please come to her. I hung up the phone and continued about my day. It was several hours later that I got a message from my parents saying I needed to be with my sister. A few days later, I got another call and was told my sister had been pregnant, the baby passed away inside of her, and she delivered a stillborn all while he was out sleeping with someone else. My parents and sister expected me to rally around her, and I didn't. Now that some time has passed and she lives with them, I've been inundated with them saying I should meet her kids, be there for them like I am my husband's nieces and nephews, and that I should reconcile with the family. My sister told me how sorry she was again and that she wanted us to make up. I told the 3 of them that she and her kids are not my problem and I still want nothing to do with them. My parents are furious, and they say I need to forgive because whatever she did, she is now suffering worse than would ever be deserved, and her kids are innocent and deserve an aunt. Am I the a-hole? Comment said, not the a-hole. Not the a-hole. Your sister ducked around, and now she's finding out. I'm incredibly sorry that either of you had to go through any of that. Both the miscarriage, stillbirth, and the cheating. But this is karma wrapped in a big ducking bow. I am not downplaying the horror of miscarriage or stillbirth, nor would I ever wish it upon anyone. It is one of the worst things a human can go through. My comment was more aimed at the cheating aspect and the fact that the 2 situations are so damn similar. Although I will add that I'm wondering what the hell kind of man sees his wife in hospital losing her baby and thinks it's the perfect time for a hookup. Another comment said, worse than could ever be deserved. I happen to think she got exactly what she deserved. She got exactly what she gave to you. Literally found herself in the exact same predicament, and the fact that she thinks she deserves your sympathy is almost comical. I honestly think you should cut communication with all three of them. Your horrid sister and kind of even more so horrid parents. Of course, you're not the a-hole. Don't question yourself for a minute. Continue to live your best life without the unnecessary baggage some might refer to as your family.
The next story is titled, Lawyer Neighbor Tries to Steal Farmer's Property and Exploit Them, Gets Destroyed in Court. I am a small business owner in a quaint little town where everyone knows each other. I had been running my business for several years now, and it was going pretty well. However, my life took an unexpected turn when a city developer bought the property next to mine. At first, I was excited about the prospect of having a new neighbor, but as time went by, I started to notice that the developer had a chip on their shoulder. They looked down on us locals, thinking they could bully us around. I didn't like the way they treated people, and their attitude was not something we welcomed in our town. One day, the developer came to me with a proposal to expand my business. I was excited at first, but when I heard their terms, I was taken aback. They wanted me to sign a contract that would give them complete control over my business, including my profits. When I refused, the developer threatened to buy out my property and put me out of business. I was shocked and felt helpless. I knew I had to do something, so I decided to fight back. I started researching and gathering evidence against the developer. I found out that they had a history of bullying other local businesses and exploiting their profits for their own gain. I went to several meetings and talked to other business owners who had experienced similar situations. I even created a group to share information and support each other. It was not just me anymore, but a group of people who had been affected by the developer's actions. Together, we hired a team of lawyers who specialized in property disputes. We started gathering more evidence and building a solid case against the developer. We knew that it was not going to be easy, but we were determined to fight for what was right. When the day of the trial arrived, the developer represented themselves, just like in the original story. They tried to use complicated legal language to confuse the judge and make themselves look smarter, but our lawyers were prepared. They asked simple questions that exposed the developer's lies and manipulation tactics. The judge ruled in our favor, and the developer was ordered to pay a hefty fine for their attempts at bullying and exploiting local businesses. Word got around about the trial, and soon everyone in town knew about what the developer had tried to do. They became a laughingstock, and no one wanted to do business with them anymore. However, the story does not end there. A few weeks after the trial, we found out that the developer had not given up. They had tried to buy up more properties in our town, hoping to continue their plans for expansion. We knew that we had to act fast and stop them before they could hurt anyone else. We organized protests and demonstrations to show our unity and to put pressure on the developer. We also reached out to the media and shared our story with the world. We wanted everyone to know what was happening in our town and to stop the developer from exploiting us any further. Our efforts paid off, and the developer was forced to sell off all of their properties and move out of town. They had lost everything, including their reputation and career. It just goes to show that you can't mess with the little guy and get away with it. In the end, justice was served, and we were able to keep our businesses and our properties. We learned that it's important to stand up for ourselves and for what we believe in, even when it seems like the odds are against us. And that sometimes bullies get a taste of their own medicine. As time went on, our town slowly started to recover from the developer's actions. People were no longer afraid of being bullied and taken advantage of. Business owners were able to focus on their work and not worry about being pushed out of their own properties. It was a new beginning for all of us. However, the developer was not done yet. They had lost everything in our town, but they were determined to continue their plans for expansion in other parts of the state. They had money and connections, and they were not going to let a small town stop them. We soon found out that the developer had moved to another town and had started buying up properties there. They had found a new group of people to exploit and bully, and we knew that we had to do something to stop them. We reached out to other towns and cities and shared our story with them. We wanted them to know what the developer was capable of, and to be aware of their actions. We also started a petition to change the laws regarding property disputes and to protect small businesses from being taken advantage of. Our efforts paid off and the petition gained traction. People from all over the state signed it, and it became a hot topic in the media. Politicians started to take notice and propose new laws that would protect small businesses and property owners from developers like the one we had faced. The developers soon realized that they were not going to get away with their actions anymore. They had become a symbol of greed and corruption, and people were starting to see them for who they really were. They had lost their reputation, their career, and now their influence. In the end, justice was served not only for our town, but for the state as a whole. We had taken a stand against a bully, and we had won. We learned that we are stronger when we come together, and that we can make a difference when we fight for what is right. The developer had lost everything, but we had gained something more valuable, our sense of community and our spirit of resilience. We knew that we could overcome anything as long as we stood together and never gave up.
The next story is titled, Am I the a-hole for spending my children's inheritance, leaving almost nothing to them and my grandchildren? I'm 63 years old. I took advantage of better times, financially speaking, and managed to get enough money to save, have a good retirement, and leave a good inheritance for my children. However, their actions in recent years have broken my heart. My oldest daughter is a lawyer married to an attorney. I have another son who is also a lawyer, a third who became an engineer, and the youngest who is a salesman. I've been a smoker for many years, and the predictable outcome has finally caught me, so I may not have many years left. After knowing this, my children began stabbing each other's backs trying to get their inheritance earlier. Initially were frequent verbal discussions that escalated to legal battles. The boiling point came when my daughter forged her brother's signature to take their part of the inheritance while I was being treated at the hospital. Now, none of the siblings can see each other in the eye and only talk through lawyers. Saddened by this situation, decided to spend the money, thinking that if all of it is gone, they would have no more reasons to fight. I donated to charities, bought my wife beauty items, went on vacation with her, paying for the better-looking hotel rooms, no planes because of COVID travel restrictions, gave my grandkids expensive gifts, bought my dearest friends and colleagues better equipment to improve their work. We bought a huge TV, prepaid for my funeral, tasted some fine whiskey, among other things. Right now, about 65 to 70% of my savings are now gone. I plan to keep enough for the time I have left and leave my wife a good cash amount. However, my children are noticing that I'm spending a lot and started to ask questions. My daughter figured out what happened on her own. I had no rebuttals since I'm guilty of all the accusations she made, but then she mentioned that her children will suffer because of my selfish acts. Not only that, but I am cursing all of her grandchildren by doing this. That made me think that my grandchildren shouldn't be punished for their parents' sins, and maybe I was too self-absorbed to realize it sooner. That's my dilemma now. Comment said, not the a-hole. What did she accuse you of? Spending your money that you earned on a life you wanted? Inheritance is what you get when someone dies. It's not yours. You're not entitled to it. You don't get to dictate what happens until you actually inherit it. You can, until the day you die, change up who gets what. You got one kid who's not being a dick? Leave it to them. Or leave it to your grandkids in a trust their folks can't touch. You can roll it up and smoke it. It's yours. You've done nothing wrong. Hell, just leave it all to your wife. That's how it should go anyway. And I'm sorry you're at this point, man. The big C sucks. Assuming that's what you meant. Another comment said, are you saying an attorney, lawyer, engineer, and a salesman can't provide for their children and have to rely on inheritance? Tell them it's your money and ultimately you aren't responsible for their grandkids' future, and they should be saving up for them. Tell your kids to jog off and do one. Another comment said, not the a-hole. When will kids learn that they are not entitled to any inheritance? This sense that you are owed money from your parents or grandparents is obscene. If people want to leave awesome to a loved one, that's fine, but no one is entitled to it. The next story is titled, Am I the a-hole for putting parental controls on my TV and royally pissing off my father-in-law? I, male, 30s, live with my wife, female, 30s. We have 2 kids, male 8 and female 6. My wife's parents are staying with us temporarily as their home is having some serious repairs after a freak accident. It wasn't their fault and luckily they had insurance. The repairs should be completed in 2 months from now. I don't really get along with my in-laws, especially my father-in-law, but I agreed to let them stay because I thought the time would fly by and it wouldn't be that bad. But I'm posting here, so I guess I was wrong. My mother-in-law doesn't have a job, and my father-in-law works late shifts until around 11 p.m. When he gets home, they'll watch YouTube in the living room and play music on it at a loud volume with our speaker system. It's not college house party bass tearing apart the walls loud, but it is still loud. My kids are not light sleepers, but this wakes them up. Then they go to wake me up because they want me to make it stop. My kids need to be rested for school, and I need to get up in the morning to drop them off and go to work. My wife works overnight shifts, so she doesn't witness this. I've tried to talk to my mother-in-law and father-in-law about it and asked that they please keep the noise down after my kids' bedtime, which is 8:30 p.m. I don't expect complete silence, but I really don't think they need to have the TV on loud late at night. My father-in-law argued with me and said that he doesn't finish work till 11 p.m., so I'm basically expecting him to not do the things he enjoys after work. I told him he can do it before work or on his days off, or it's tough crap. He complained to my wife, who's now taking his side and saying that the kids need to learn how to sleep through a bit of everyday noise. I told her it's not everyday noise and that he and mother-in-law are being excessively noisy and inconsiderate. She's just not there to see it. My father-in-law has been sending me links to buy earplugs for the kids. I've gotten really fed up with this. It's not my in-laws' house, and they're staying with us as guests, and I think they're being really selfish. I decided to put parental controls on the TV so that my in-laws can't use it after 8:30 p.m. until 6 a.m. the next day. Between those times, the TV can't be used without putting in the password, and only I know it. This doesn't affect my wife, as she doesn't get off work until 6 a.m. and isn't normally home until 6:20ish. My father-in-law is now incredibly pissed off with me and said that I'm acting like a child and keeps pestering me, demanding the password. My wife is also mad at me for upsetting her dad. I'm just so annoyed at this whole situation, and I'm sick of hearing about it, so I just want to know if I'm morally in the clear. Comment said, not the a-hole. Your in-laws are rude and inconsiderate, and your wife should be managing them and backing you up in this. Had she done so, you would not need to take such drastic measures. Both you and the kids need your sleep. The in-laws are guests in your home. This is wildly inappropriate for them to act this way. If they don't like the house rules, they can go to a motel. Another comment said, not the a-hole. They may be in-laws, but they're guests within your home. You've asked them politely before, and they've ignored you. Tell them to read a book to keep themselves entertained. The next story is titled, Am I the a-hole for not spending this Christmas in the hospital with my daughter? My, 39 female, daughter, 16 female, has had a sensitive stomach ever since she was a kid. There are certain foods that will upset her stomach to the point where she's unable to stop throwing up. We've seen countless doctors, but so far nobody's been able to give us a clear answer. The only advice we keep getting is to identify all trigger foods and cut them from her diet. We have a pretty good idea of what those foods are: soda and other carbonated drinks, chips, Cheetos, and other similar processed snacks, anything oily or fried, and most sweets. Unfortunately, this is exactly the kind of stuff my daughter loves to eat the most. And as horrible as she feels after she has them, she still refuses to cut them out of her diet, which in turn led to her spending a lot of time in the hospital during the past few years. When she was little, it was easier to keep all these foods away from her because I simply wouldn't buy them. But now that she's older, I can't always be there to check what she eats. She eats the greasy pizza at her school's cafeteria, she trades her lunch with her classmates, she goes out with her friends and stops to eat at KFC, and so on. And it always ends with her in the ER, crying and shaking because she can't stop throwing up. This was the case on this Christmas Eve as well, when our whole family gathered at our place. And of course, among the many dishes at our Christmas table were some of her main trigger foods, like chips, soda, chocolate, and sweets. Now mind you, these were far from the only foods available to her. We also had a variety of home-cooked traditional dishes on the table with ingredients that don't upset her stomach, like vegetables, meat, dairy, etc. All of them delicious and well-seasoned. My daughter herself says she really likes most of these dishes. Despite this, my daughter chose to eat nothing but her trigger foods. I reminded her that they'd make her feel awful, but she said she didn't care because Christmas is only once a year and she just wants to live a little. Well, this ended with her violently throwing up in the ER a few hours later. She had to be hospitalized for a few days and only just got out of the hospital a few hours ago. And unlike all the previous times when something like this happened, this time I chose to spend my Christmas relaxing at home with the rest of our family and not in the hospital by my daughter's side. I kept in touch with her through calls and texts and told her that if she needed anything, I'd ask a family member to bring it to her. But I made it clear that I would not be visiting her during her stay. And, well, my daughter didn't take this too well. She cried every time we talked on the phone, begged me to come over, told me how horrible I was for abandoning her there all alone, and so on. Most of our family didn't take my side in this either, and during the past few days, I got called everything from a little extreme to downright cruel and heartless. Am I the a-hole? Comment said, not sure if I'm going to be in the minority here or get downvoted, oh well, but I'm going with not the a-hole. She's 16, and for sure smart enough and mature enough to know better. As cliche as the saying is, and as much as it's overused on Reddit, play stupid games, win stupid prizes. This isn't a case of a 7-year-old that doesn't really know any better. This is a person that will legally be an adult in less than 2 years. She knows full well what she can and cannot eat, and she made a personal choice to eat things she shouldn't. While it may seem cruel and heartless, maybe you leaving her there by herself, obviously she's not since there were plenty of staff there with her, will be the wake-up call she needs to stop eating the crap that makes her get admitted into the hospital. Another comment said, not the a-hole because of this. She said she didn't care because Christmas is only once a year and she just wants to live a little. But she eats the greasy pizza at her school's cafeteria, she trades her lunch with her classmates, she goes out with her friends and stops to eat at KFC and so on. And it always ends with her in the ER, crying and shaking because she can't stop throwing up. This is not a moment of poor judgment because she's a teenager and it's Christmas. She does this regularly and doesn't care how it affects her or others. Now I say not the a-hole because I understand it must be frustrating that your daughter doesn't care for her own health. But you really should talk to her and figure it out why she has no care at all for her own well-being.
The next one is an entitled people story.
When I used to bartend, I tried to have tolerance of people and their situations. Sometimes people would come in and have the worst attitudes. Usually by the time their night was over, there'd be some type of calm/apologetic tone when they closed their tabs. Then there was this one girl. She was in her early 20s and was with a guy friend sitting at the bar. I carded them and she immediately gave an attitude about it. Then, after reading the martini menu, I worked at a bar that specialized in martinis, she made a few comments about how the martinis better be worth it. She ordered her first martini a thin mint. Her friend ordered a dirty. I made both at the same time and put the glasses in front of them and walked to the other customers. I went to check on them 10 minutes later and she berates me for the crappy martinis I made and the thin mint tastes like ass even though she managed to drink almost all of it. Her friend liked his martini and ordered another and apparently tried to calm her down. I gave her the benefit of the doubt, took the martini away and asked what she would like instead of that one and also free of charge. She asked for a fruity martini with the same attitude. I made both martinis, set them down in front of them and walk away. More people came in and it gets decently busy. The other bartender comes up to me and says that she wants to talk to me. I walk up to her and again, the martini, also almost finished, was the worst and this is the worst establishment she's ever been to and won't ever come again. I give them the tab to get them to leave. 15 minutes later, she's now yelling about the awful service and telling other customers that they shouldn't stay in the bar with crappy drinks and how she could make better martinis. She was awful, and after her friend paid the tab, no tip, I told her in no uncertain terms that she is never allowed back into the bar. She asked to speak to the manager, and I said I was the manager. Here's the petty. 2 weeks later, her friend, B, is having a birthday party at the bar. B's friends are all showing up to celebrate with her. In walks the girl who berated me, the bar, and the other customers. I looked at her and told her that she was not allowed into the bar and needed to leave. That I was not up to dealing with anything out of her mouth, nor her attitude. She pleads with me to please let her stay as it's her best friend's birthday, blah blah. B asks if there's anything she could do to stay. So I tell them that she can stay, but she cannot say one word or sound the entire time she is there. If I or anyone else in that bar hears anything, she needs to leave. The entire night she had to use pen and paper or her phone to communicate. It was also even more embarrassing for her because a few of the regulars that saw her the first time let it be known to the entire bar why she was muted. It became a game with them to try to get her to make a sound. The next story is titled, Dispute with Neighbor Over Property Ownership Leads to Division of Building in Half. Living in a peaceful suburban neighborhood with my family was always a dream for me. However, that dream turned into a nightmare when my neighbor claimed that he owned a piece of my property. This neighbor was a single man in his 60s, and he had recently built a shed, or a utility building as he called it, on his property. I didn't have a problem with that until I realized that the shed was on my land, and it wasn't just a few inches over, but it was halfway into my property. This meant that I had to deal with my crazy neighbor who didn't seem to care about my property or my concerns. One day I decided to go and talk to him to see if he was aware of the situation, and I found him to be very hostile. He told me that he wasn't going to move the shed and that he would kill me if I came onto his land again. I was shocked and terrified. I didn't know how to deal with this situation, but I knew I had to find a solution. I started by doing some research on the property line, and I found out that the building was illegally constructed. The building was also being used to store illegal firearms, and the neighbor's threatening behavior made me even more nervous. I decided to call the police and report him for the illegal building and firearms. The police came and searched his property, and they found several illegal firearms in the shed. The neighbor was arrested, and the police took the firearms into custody. Although the neighbor was in jail, the building was still on my property, and I had to find a way to deal with it. I hired a surveyor to confirm the property line and mark it with stakes. Then I hired a contractor to use a chainsaw to cut the building in half exactly on the property line. I watched with satisfaction as the building was sliced in two, and I felt a sense of relief. The neighbor couldn't use the building anymore, and he wouldn't be able to sell his property with an illegal building on it. However, my victory didn't last long. A few weeks later, I received a letter from a law firm representing the neighbor. They were suing me for the destruction of the building, claiming that it was an act of vandalism. They demanded that I pay for the full cost of the building, which was a considerable amount. I was shocked and angry. I had followed the law and had every right to protect my property, but now I was being sued for it. I hired a lawyer to defend myself, and we went to court. The neighbor claimed that he had no idea that the building was on my property and that I had destroyed it without his consent. I presented the surveyor's report and the police report, which proved that the building was illegal and that it was also being used to store illegal firearms. The judge ruled in my favor and dismissed the lawsuit. I felt relieved that the matter was finally resolved. However, the neighbor was still in jail and his property was still in legal limbo. The town decided to sell the property at auction, and it was bought by a developer who planned to build a new house on it. The old shed was removed and the property was cleaned up. I was relieved that the eyesore was gone and the new house was a nice addition to the neighborhood. Update: a few months after the auction, I received a call from the police department. They informed me that the neighbor had been released from jail and had come to the police station to pick up his firearms. The police refused to give him the firearms back as they were still evidence in an ongoing investigation into his illegal possession of firearms. The neighbor became agitated and threatened the police officers, who arrested him again for disorderly conduct and making threats. A few days later, I received a letter from the neighbor's lawyer who was demanding that I pay for his legal fees and compensation for his time in jail. I was outraged that he was still trying to make me pay for his illegal activities. I contacted my lawyer and we decided to countersue the neighbor for his illegal activities and the cost of the lawsuit that he had filed against me. We went to court and the judge ruled in my favor, stating that the neighbor had no rights to claim compensation for his illegal activities. However, the neighbor refused to give up and he continued to file frivolous lawsuits against me. It seemed like he was determined to make my life miserable and I didn't know what to do. I was worried that he might try to retaliate against me and I started to fear for my family's safety. Then one day, I received a call from the police department. They informed me that the neighbor had been arrested for possession of illegal firearms and for planning an attack on my family. They had found evidence in his house that he had been monitoring my family's movements and had planned to attack us. I was horrified, and grateful that the police had caught him before he could harm us. The neighbor was sentenced to several years in prison and his property was seized by the state. The house was sold at auction again, and this time it was bought by a family who were happy to be living in a peaceful neighborhood. I finally felt safe and relieved that the nightmare was over. In the end, justice was served, and I learned that sometimes you have to fight for what's right, even if it means going up against a crazy neighbor. I also learned the importance of being vigilant and taking measures to protect yourself and your family. Although the experience was traumatic, it taught me to be more aware of my surroundings and to stand up for my rights. The next story is titled, "My Dad is Forcing Me to Either Quit My Job or to Half My Hours, Yet Refuses to Support Me Financially Despite the Fact that I'm a Minor. Is this normal?" For reference, I'm 17 and I'm in school full-time, 5 days a week. I work 12 to 8 on the weekends and haven't had a day off other than for COVID leave since August. Of course, my 7-day week schedule isn't ideal, but I really appreciate the income and have grown to like my job. Last summer, I really struggled to find myself a job. I was 16, and after dropping in and emailing 40 different employers and revising my CV about 1,000,000 times, I lost all hope. My parents decided that I was old enough to support myself and cut me off financially and stopped giving me bus money or lifts. I live in the countryside about 20 kilometers away from all my friends, so I spent the summer completely alone, which was really difficult for me. All of my employed friends had gotten their jobs through their parents or friends of their parents, but my parents still made no effort to put in a personal word on my behalf to any employers they were on friendly terms with. Anyways, August rolled around and I finally got a job at a McDonald's about a half-hour drive from me after 4 months in isolation. My parents immediately turned their noses up at the mention of McDonald's, but I wasn't in any position to be picky and I'm still very grateful for the job. They've always put massive pressure on me to do well in school, and so to please them, I've been overexerting myself for months and have a long streak of A's and B's. Unfortunately, I miss a day or two of school on average a month because of my period. For years, I've spent once a month paralyzed with cramps and nausea, which are a million times worse than what any other girl I've talked to about this has ever experienced. I'm convinced I have endometriosis and have brought the subject up with my parents again and again over the years and have begged them for a hospital appointment. 4 years later, and I still haven't seen anybody about my period pains, and I still continue to miss school over it. Despite this, my parents are constantly on my back about the days that I've missed at school, and yet neglect to get me any sort of help or treatment for what I'm going through. About 2 months ago, I missed a week of school because I was sure I had COVID, when in actuality, I just had a bad dose of tonsillitis. My parents were furious when I tested negative for COVID and nagged and argued with me about it for about another month until I actually did test positive and ended up missing another full week of school. I've since caught up on all the work I missed, and I haven't broken my streak of A's and B's. Today and yesterday I stayed home from school because I've had another bout of tonsillitis, which went untreated last time and this time as well. Apparently this was the breaking point for my dad, and he called me down from my room and told me if I didn't either quit my job or drop down to 1 day a week, he was going to go into the manager's office and withdraw his parental consent himself. He blamed my illness on work and told me that it was unacceptable that I was missing school and told me that I needed to take a day off to dedicate wholly to study. I tried to reason with him and showed him my report cards and recent test results and told him my grades were perfect and I couldn't be blamed for catching COVID or tonsillitis. He shut me down and told me that my grades didn't matter because the fact remained that I was still missing school. I'm unsure what to do or how to change my dad's mind. I know a 7-day week is extreme for someone my age, but I have no other option. In order to see my friends and do nice things in the city outside of school, I need funds. In order to have funds, I need a job. My parents want me to have both a school life and a social life, but won't give me a single cent out of their pocket to get me out of my countryside jail cell. Pocket money is out of the question. I've tried to negotiate my way into making some kind of deal with them by doing good in school and doing any chores my parents ask of me, but their argument is that I shouldn't be rewarded for doing the bare minimum of what is expected of me. Now that I have my own job, I'm financially independent and can no longer be guilt-tripped by them about money or by my laziness. I'm currently saving for a month-long holiday during the summer, and I already have deposits laid down and plane tickets bought. Still, I need to earn a little extra money to pay the entire thing off. It's my reward to myself for the effort I've put in at school and for all the hours I've worked. For me, my job allows me to actually do nice things for myself and to see my friends. Quitting it or slicing my income in half is not an option. Without it, my parents have made it very clear that they would not support me or give me any kind of pocket money to get a bus to see my friends or to treat myself. I've proved to my parents time and time again that I can excel in school, take care of my physical and mental health, see my friends, and simultaneously work, but they're still not satisfied. I'm very frustrated by this whole situation as I'm an only child who's fortunate to have 2 working parents who are married happily. Still, it often bothers me that I have friends with 5 siblings and a single mother who have better financial support than me. Of course, I know people's financial situations are not nearly as straightforward as that, and I don't mean to sound spoiled, but it is frustrating for me and I wish my life could be different. What can I do? Am I being an a-hole by not obeying them? Is that fair? The last story is titled, Sorry, Dear Cousin and Entitled Family, I Won't Be the Maid of Honor. I, 27F, have a cousin, 26F, with who we were really close and people thought we were sisters, but that changed in high school. She became a completely different person than what she was. It got to the point that she relaxed my hair with her hair relaxer, which is a strong one and mine was a soft one, to see me in pain because she started dating my ex-BF because she was the other girl. Because of this, I had to cut my hair due to the fact that it was expired and my hair wouldn't stop falling. After that, she would steal friends and boyfriends just to spite me, but I didn't let this affect me. From 2018 until late 2019, I dated my ex, 33M, and she hooked up with him and got together. She thought she would affect me by doing this, but she was livid that I didn't care. She started harassing me by sending pictures of them together and leaving on my balcony a black voodoo doll, which I got a restraining order due to the harassment. But it was for 6 months, lasted in 2020. Now to the present. She recently got engaged and she announced it on Facebook. I don't have one, friends and family told me all about it, but I didn't care. And the wedding was going to be a Christmas wedding. Recently at family dinner, she asked me to be her maid of honor because thanks to you, we met. Everybody stopped talking and paid attention to what I was going to say, but I flatly said no. She then asked why, and all I did was give her a look that said, "You know why." She then started saying that it would be a good opportunity to bond again. I told her I wasn't going to do it and asked for someone else since the day she was having her wedding I would be away on a trip. She started crying, more like manipulating, that if I can't do this I would be uninvited to the wedding. I told her fine by me. I didn't wait for her answer, I left her with a surprised Pikachu face. When I got home I got angry texts from my family saying that I should be the bigger person and do this for her. Toxic much? Well, that's what happens when you're raised in a Latino household. And I explained this to some friends and my BF, 28M. They told me I did the right thing by turning this down, and I gave her my reasons. I don't care about becoming the villain in the family, I'm just avoiding drama and toxicity. I'm just saving myself. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.